Now that my RB25 is back together in some kind of fashion, it's time to install the timing components. So all the stuff that links the cams to the crank, timing belt, tensioners, that sort of stuff. So let's dive right in. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the timing components, the water pump, and the oil pump. So in a previous video, we went to my friend Aaron's workshop, PLR, and he fitted this new longer crank collar. And so that's sitting there ready to have my new oil pump basically placed over the top of it. So we're just going to take a look at the service manual, and we're going to do this in the correct order and slowly chip away at it. So one thing that I wanted to kind of show off is my rear timing cover. I kind of just wanted to come up with the same sort of chrome or you know, almost polished steel kind of look as my cam covers. So I stripped the paint off this, I sort of sanded it back a bit and gave it a clear coat. It's not perfect, but I think that looks quite nice. Yeah, pretty neat. And so I've also got a clear timing cover to sit over that. So, you know, once it's all said and done, everything should look nice in sort of silver, which goes with my color scheme of sort of silver and black, which matches the outside of the car anyway. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with how that's turned out for fairly minimal effort. And it looks like the previous owner stripped one of the heads off one of the bolts there, so that's cool. Alright, the next step is to install the variable cam gear onto the intake cam. So it's pretty straightforward. There's sort of two sections to this. The first part is getting the actual cam gear on, and that's just held in with a bolt. Alright, so I've got a spanner there holding the cam still, and then I'm going to tighten the nut holding the VCT cam gear on the front of the intake cam. Okay, so the next part of the process is this little spring has to go into the pulley there, and then the cover with this O-ring just sits on top, and all the service manual says about the screws for this is to do them up opposite each other. So next is the exhaust cam. Now there's only one way that a stock exhaust cam can go on, which is great. So that just sits on there, and there's a little bracket that sits on top and screws into the end of the cam. So next up is going to be the water pump. So the OEM water pump that I pulled off was a round hole version. I think the OEM ones, obviously they're designed to fit in the right place, so the pump that came off just had one hole for this bolt here. The aftermarket, oh yeah, there we go, like this one here. Alright, so here's the OEM water pump that I pulled off. You can see it's got the little round hole at the top there. So that's obviously, it's designed to fit in a certain place that it's supposed to go, whereas these aftermarket ones have a slotted hole there, so that they fit what different model RBs, so I guess like the RB25, 26, 20, yeah. Whatever.
I think the 26 and the 30s have the hole a little bit further away from the sealing area.
Yeah, cool. So we're going to slap that one on. We just have to be a little bit more careful about sealing around that bolt hole with some extra RTV. What we're going to do is cover this with RTV first, then put the new gasket on there, then put more RTV on this side of the gasket, and then press that onto the motor like that, and then go around and then do the bolts up like that. So should I go around all the bolt holes as well?
You don't necessarily have to do all of them if you don't want to, but it is best to do so.
Okay, let's go around.
Especially the slotted one.
Yeah.
Pretty well just gluing some paper to metal, and then gluing that bit of paper to the other bit of metal.
It's so simple when you sum it up like that.
The face of concentration. This is why they taught us how to finger paint in preschool.
So none of that's overhanging into the actual cavity there, right?
Yeah.
A little bit.
Probably going to squish out a bit when you stick that down.
Right. I'll just pop it on.
Like, the gasket does have its own kind of glue on the surface, but
right.
Nobody ever trusts it, which is fair, because, you know, nobody wants to change the water pump on an inline-six engine once it's in the car.
Yeah, no. I don't want to be taking this back off for that slotted hole leaking.
It's especially worse if you have a JZ.
Really?
Don't do it, I've done it.
Okay, I won't do it. Okay, I won't JZ swap my stage, yeah, it's fine.
Somebody else did it. It's a
Yeah,
good idea, but
Josh, yeah.
impractical.
No, he loves it. Alright, so that's got the RTV on there, as well as the gasket that came with the pump. Now I'm going to put more RTV on this side of it, and then we're going to slap that onto the engine. I can't do this vertically. Oh, there's a whole other angle to think about. 2 angles. Do you think I am, some kind of physicist? Okay. So same as before. I'm going to go and flatten this all out a bit. I feel like this is making it too thin. I'm an idiot. Like, don't listen to what I say. It's fine.
You can probably have half as much as what's on there, and it's
Yeah, that's what I'm realizing.
It's actually going to get squished down so far.
Yeah. All right.
Ravi's already high off the smell of
Man,
silicon.
I am. Hey. Some good. So, on it goes. If I don't fall over.
Yeah, just the rest of those to stick in there.
Alright, so I'm just going around and putting all these bolts in, and we'll do the slotted hole last.
You can see it's got a nice little layer of RTV sticking out all the way around it.
10, 12, and 14, is it?
Should be.
Do you have any idea what the torque specs are off the top of your head?
3/5 of fuck all is the torque spec.
I see. Got a nice amount of squish coming out everywhere. Alright, I'm going to torque these bolts up. The middle size bolts, which I think are M8s, we're going for, what was it, 25-ish?
20 newton meters to 26, I think the spec was. Fits a lot better than the socket did onto the head studs.
These big ones, we're going for about 30, well, just over 30 foot-pounds. The middle
He
size
means
ones...
newton meters.
Newton meters. I was not looking at newton meters. I'm glad you said that.
If he does it to 30 foot-pounds, that thing gonna snap. He lost the socket again.
14. There we go. Okay. Alright, so now I'm going to torque these bolts up. These big ones to, what was it? 31.4 newton meters. I like how you move the microphone in just to get the click.
That's a really quiet click on that torque wrench.
Cool, and then...
The tiny 6mm, the wrench doesn't go down low enough, so it's kind of just hand tight. Its spec is 6 newton meters.
6 newton meters. The minimum on this is 13.
Just do it up hand tight with a ratchet. Watch him break it. It'll feel like it's stretching.
That's the tightest I'm willing to go.
Tiny bolts are the sketchiest thing to tension.
I'm very scared right now. That was set to... Oh, I think it was set to 13 newton meters, which is the lowest this torque wrench reads. And that's as far as I'm willing to push it. So I think that's all of the bolts. What do you reckon?
Well, that's all the bolts for the water pump. We still got like another 700 to do up for the oil pump and the sump.
We're done. Let's start her up. Alright, so next up is the oil pump. So my original oil pump from my RB25 had scoring marks all through it. We basically think because of the little bits of metal that came off the crank and the thrust bearing, all those little bits basically had to go somewhere. They kind of went all through the engine and ended up making their way to the oil pump. So what I've done is I've picked up a new second-hand oil pump, and I've also picked up a set of spool billet oil pump gears to put into this oil pump. So at the moment, Aaron's just cleaning out the old sealant from this second-hand pump. Then we're going to go ahead and take out the stock gears that are inside that and replace that with these spool ones.
Stuff is so hard to get off. Takes forever.
Go ahead and see what's inside. So stock oil pump gears. They can go in the bin.
The main reason people replace them is the stock ones are made of powdered metal, and they tend to break at high RPM or under a lot of load. They just fall apart. So you replace it with a nice billet part instead.
Alright, so while we've got this apart, we're going to replace this seal. What do we just press it out?
Yeah. Just going to try and do it by hand. This will be funny.
How should I?
With a lot of force.
Right. But by hand is doable?
If you got really strong hands.
Oh, we're going to find out.
Normally people would use a screwdriver and a hammer.
Right, okay, yes.
Here we go, it's moving. Well, the good thing is the last person who changed that seal didn't mark up the housing at all. So, shouldn't have any issues of it leaking around the outside of the seal.
So, here's a new crank seal, and basically what? We just press that in there using this.
Yep.
So, turn that around that way.
It should be fine, but if you want to make sure it's definitely not going to leak, just a little bit of silicone. Just lightly smear it around the outside of the seal instead of in the housing. So that way anything that's going to get in there will get in there and any excess will be on the outside.
So I've just put a very fine layer of RTV on the outside here and made sure that there's none going across into the inside area. And so then here is a, what size is this?
I have no idea.
36?
There you go.
36 millimeter socket that I didn't even realize I had. But apparently it's the perfect size to press this seal in.
There you go.
Beautiful. Cool. So next thing is to set up these billet oil pump gears to go inside the housing. So there's already a bit of oil on there, right?
Yeah. And those gears have to stay in the orientation they're packed.
Right. I'm glad you said that.
So this side is the outside. Being careful not to slice your finger open when you do this, because there's sharp edges.
Alright, so that's my new oil pump that I've cleaned up. I've put the spool billet gears in there, put a little bit of lube around all the surfaces that touch. Now I'm going to go ahead and put some RTV around the sealing surface so we can bolt this backing plate back on, and then we'll go from there. So I'm just putting a light film of rubber grease on this seal before we slip that over the crank. Alright, so we've got the oil pump there with the spool billet gears inside. We've got the gasket and some RTV on it. We've got the new crank seal with some rubber grease on it. And now all that's left to do is bolt this onto the block. So just before we actually put it on the car, we did realise that we forgot to put Loctite on these bolts. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Alright, so what I'm doing is I'm just going to orientate the flats, which are currently about there and there, on the pump, onto the collar that we've got on the crank.
And rotate.
And then use that to rotate it a little bit. And then I should just be able to push, right?
Yep. As soon as those dials line up.
Oh, look at that. Oh, beautiful. Wrong hole. Not the first time you've heard that, is it, Aaron?
Yeah, we never get the wrong hole. I definitely don't make mistakes. We didn't put the pistons in the wrong way.
Shut up, man. I cut that bit out. Did I? I don't know. I haven't made that video yet.
Well, you can cut that bit out too.
I haven't hit 13 on any of these yet.
Once. Once.
One more time. Alright, so now we're going to install the time gear onto the crank. So that's going to include the timing sprocket as well as the couple of washers that sort of sit on either side of that. There's a washer that goes on the back side, like on the engine side. Then the sprocket goes on, and then there's another washer that goes on the outer side. Before I do any of that, I've got to install 2 new Woodruff keys onto the crank itself. Alright, we're going to take a quick look at the parts we need. So here's my old timing sprocket. It was in perfect condition, so I'm reusing that. I've ordered 2 new Woodruff keys, so they're genuine Nissan ones. I think they're the same for RBs and SRs, and basically all Nissans from what I can see. Could be wrong on that. I've also ordered these 2 washers. One goes on the front of the crank, one goes on the back of the crank. So we're going to go ahead, start by putting these Woodruff keys in, and then the rest can go on hopefully fairly easily. Alright, now I'm just going to try and slide this on and just see if it fits. Okay, fits over the first one, not so much the second one. Alright, so now I've got both the keys in there. It's time to start putting the washers and the sprocket on. So this small washer appears to go on first, and it's got a bit of a chamfer to it. It kind of curves down at the edge. So I'm going to put it so that it's kind of going like that direction onto the crank. So then next up, the crank timing sprocket. So we're going to put this on so the little timing mark dimple is visible on the outside of the motor. Alright, so next up, the tensioner on this shaft and the idler pulley on this little threaded hole here. So the idler is pretty straightforward. It's just one bolt through the actual pulley. It's going to put some Loctite on the threads, and then we're going to torque that up because that's done then. When it comes to the tensioner on the other side, there's a little bit of a trick involved with that, so I'll show you that when we get to that soon. Just got to make sure that washes on there. Alright, so I'm going to torque this up to 40 foot-pounds, which is about there. Alright, so that's the idler done. Now we move on to the tensioner. Alright, so for the tensioner, this is what it looks like. It's got a little spring in the back, and that has to sit, that little part of the spring that sticks out has to sit over a little rod that sticks out from the block. Alright, so here's the tensioner, and it just goes on this shaft. So we slide this on here, and then there's this other little shaft just down next to it, to the right, that this little part that sticks out the side of that spring has to sit on top of. So we'll slide that on, push it back, and we make sure that that spring is sitting up on top of the rod. Before I go any further, I'm just going to put a bit of Loctite on there as well. So then we tighten this up. I'm not sure about how tight to make it just yet. Okay, so now we take a 5mm Allen key and we stick that in this little slot, and we just end up using that like a little handle. So we can now move the pulley all the way out to the other side, and it's been held in place by the little spring at the back. So it keeps wanting to turn back this way and put tension on, you know, the timing belt if there was a timing belt installed. So what we want to do is push this all the way back and tighten it down at the same time so it's all the way back out of the way. And so there you go. So the tensioner is installed kind of temporarily for now. Once we get the timing belt running through here, I guess we undo this slightly, and that'll spring back this way and put the right tension onto the timing belt. So I guess the next thing to do from here is, of course, the timing belt. Alright, so before I can put the timing belt on, I'm checking my timing marks. So the exhaust cam gear I've already lined up here. The intake cam gear I almost lined up. I'll fix that up in a second. It's off by about 1 tooth. But the crank is a bit of a different story. So I've now just put the bolt in temporarily. The timing mark on the sprocket is about here. I've got to rotate that down to about here to be in line with the mark on the oil pump there. So I've got another 1 or 2 teeth to go. There we go. Alright, so that was an equally awesome and terrifying experience. Turning every part of this motor so that it's timed, or so that it's sitting at top dead center, in order for me to go ahead and now put the timing belt on. So I'm going to go ahead and double check and triple check that I've lined everything up to the right timing marks, and then I'm going to go ahead and start putting the timing belt on. So there we go, that's the intake cam lined up, and there's the exhaust cam lined up, and down the bottom the crank lined up to the little mark on the oil pump there as well. Alright, let's go ahead and try this timing belt. So from what I can see, these two marks seem to be the closest together. So I assume these two marks will be for the cams. It does say on here front with the little arrow facing this way. So I'm going to use this as the intake cam. So there we go, that's the mark there for the exhaust cam. So that's spot on, which is good. And then we've got to try and get this all the way down around the crank sprocket. No! Actually, I might try that. I might start from the bottom this time and work my way up. Oh! Yes! Alright, so I wasn't expecting that to be so hard, but I think all up that was 15 minutes of trying, I think. So it wasn't too bad. So now I'm going to release the tension on this tensioner, and then that'll put the proper tension onto the belt itself. And so now all that's left to do is to turn it over by hand and see how it feels. This is the first time this whole engine is going to be spun over by hand. I can hear air hissing out of each cylinder in turn as the engine's turning over. I'll see if I can pick it up with the camera. So I guess that means that there's compression in the cylinders. Like, that's a good sign, right? I think. Stoked. Alright, so now that the belt is on and I've verified that all the marks line up, I've turned it over once or twice and then just tighten that wherever that kind of ends up. So we're going to do that now. Ah. Very good. So the next component is the front washer for the timing sprocket. So I'm putting that on facing with like the concave section facing outwards. So the flat part of this washer should be up against the sprocket on the crank. The reason I know that is because that's my previous one. So you can clearly see where the teeth from the sprocket sat previously. Okay, while we're at this end of the engine as well, I'm going to put the cam angle sensor back on. So looking at the lower timing cover now, you can see where all these marks were from the harmonic balancer being pulled back by the previous setup. You can see that like the whole front of this plastic section. It's just been completely worn back. So I've tried to tidy it up a little bit. I don't think it's worth spending the money on a new cover like that. Like, it's not broken, it just looks a bit scratched up, but it's right at the bottom where the harmonic balancer is going to sit on top of anyway. No one's ever going to see it, so. Lower timing cover, done. Alright, so lower timing cover's on. All the timing belt stuff is done. The next thing, the big one that we've been waiting for, is the harmonic balancer. So in order to fit the harmonic balancer all the way to the engine, I've just tapped it on lightly, just a little bit, trying to keep it as straight as possible. Then I'm going to put the crank nut in. I'm going to lock up the back side of the engine so that the motor can't spin, and then I'm going to just tighten this nut, and hopefully that'll pull the balancer all the way that way. Alright, so I've locked up the rear of the motor. I've just put a couple of bolts into where the flywheel goes, and I've just locked up a spanner in there as well, so as the crank tries to rotate, the spanner just can't move. It's locked onto the edge of the engine stand there, so that'll prevent the crank from rotating as I turn the nut on the harmonic balancer. Let's give it a go. So the torque spec is about 140 Newton meters, so it's right up the big end. Good fun. The whole engine just tried rotating instead of the nut. And being that this motor is so much back together now, I think it's only fitting that we put the clear timing cover on. Time to put the cam angle sensor in. Pretty straightforward. So there you go, guys, that's basically everything to do with all the timing components and everything else at the front of this RB25 motor, basically on there, ready to go, ready to move on to the next step sort of thing. So that's where I'll leave it for this video. There will be a couple more videos coming out soon with all the other bits and pieces that I still have left to do. I can't think of what else I need to do right now at this point in time, but I'm very happy with the progress I've made over the last couple of weeks. She's definitely starting to look a lot nicer. So guys, if you did like this video, make sure you subscribe, and yeah, hopefully see you again soon. Bye. Alright, so now we're going to,